There are around 30,000 kinds of edible plants in the world that humans can eat, and yet we only eat about 200 of them on a regular basis. Concerns over the diversity of our food should make us take a second look at menus and also at how we produce food. So why do so few of the plants we would eat actually make it to our tables? Is it due to the industrialization of the food industry? And if so, is that one of the downsides of an industry that has also helped increase food supplies to feed more people than ever before? And could food diversity be associated with poverty? To talk about these issues, I'm joined today by Dr. Zhou Jinfeng, Secretary General of the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, Mr. Jian Yi, founder and president of the Good Food Fund, Paul Noonan, director of the SDG 2 Advocacy Hub Secretariat, and Dr. Stefan Wise, Managing Director of Asia at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So let me start with you, Jian Yi. You are the founder and president of the Good Food Fund. In your opinion, what is good food?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much for inviting me. Good food, when we say good food, we mean food that is good for the individual and good for the environment, for the planet.
And Stefan, of course, thanks to technology and agriculture, most people today probably enjoy easier access to more food. But on the other hand, it seems people are eating less varieties of food. Why is that?
Well, I think you're right in that we speak today of 12 crops and 5 animal species that provide about 75% of the world's food today. So it's very limited compared to the amount of potential there is out there. And we also see that although globally traded commodities are expanding over time, there is a significant decline in terms of the locally significant foods. So yes, we have somewhat more trading going on than 30, 40 years ago, but at the same time, the local foods are declining. And that has a lot to do with consumer behavior, with urbanization, and therefore there's a lot of work to be done in terms of both making more diversity of food available, but also in terms of communicating the importance of this diversity to consumers.
But do you think this kind of eating pattern evolved organically? What is at play that we get where we are now?
I think it's a combination of factors. It's a combination of commercialization and globalization that's taking place. But at the same time, the urbanization of the people, they're looking for more convenient foods. And often what is happening is that foods that are seen to be more traditional have become sort of outmoded, outdated. And so in urban areas, we see more processed foods being consumed. And so the challenge here is really in terms of how do we get that diversity produced and to the consumers, and to show that this is healthy from a human health point of view, but can also be produced in a healthier way for the environment.
And Paul, of course, globalization expanded the menu, and you are a chef. Do you think we have to eat processed, industrialized food? Is this the only option right now as we have entered modern world?
I would say there definitely has been a change in the amount of food that's available. But I think we don't only have to eat industrialized and processed. In certain times, that is very important.
Yeah.
But then at other times, there's lots of information and lots of access to different ingredients. It's been challenging to get that information and to get that access universally. And I think that's probably one of the biggest issues.
Why do so few of the edible plants that actually feature on our tables? Paul?
I think part of the challenge for the lack of diversity on our plates has been because up until not that many years ago, we used to have hungry periods in every part of the world. And so there's been a lot of advancement on the agriculture side to try and increase the quantity of food produced and the price that it's produced at. And what that's done is actually reduced the number of being focused on. And so we're seeing more mass production of certain crops. And that's lost a lot of the biodiversity within species and also across species. And so there's I think, a price issue in terms of access. And so what actually then gets on our plate, because of our interconnectedness and because of how we are forming a bit more of a global kind of market, has been limited. And so we just don't see the same variety with different local elements on the plate.
And what we are losing out by focusing on so few? Paul?
So the lack of biodiversity on our plate has a number of factors. The factors include to our own personal, and I think Jinyi spoke a little bit about what good food is, that's good for people and good for the planet. And I think health benefits, because we're not getting the diversity within our plate, we're not getting the benefits of all the micro and macronutrients that are in different foods. We're only getting certain benefits and nutrients. We're not getting the environmental benefits of a biodiverse system. So if, for example, there is an issue around a particular climate issue or a pest or something like this, if you only have one system, then that can have a dramatic effect on the whole food system. Whereas if you have different varieties in a farmland, then you can actually have more protection against climate issues. And so we're not getting that same protection as well as those health benefits.
And Stefan, of course, scientists always talk about biodiversity, but why does it matter to us if we can be well fed and have enough nutrition? Why biodiversity is an issue that concerns us?
Well, so that biodiversity is the foundation, in a sense, for a good diet diversity and therefore good nutrition. And then secondly is the planet part as well. Biodiversity is important in terms of sustainable production systems, in addressing different production systems, but also in terms of addressing climate resilience, for example. Biodiversity becomes very critical and important as well. So again, going back to that notion of diets and production, biodiversity is at the basis of that if we want to make headway in those two areas.
And Mr. Zhou, what about those maple food like corn, rice, and wheat? We relying on those food? Does it mean that we are placing food security in danger?
Yes, and like buckwheat, a Japanese professor found a wild buckwheat in Yunnan, China, and he bring that wild buckwheat back and hybrid with their traditional buckwheat to get a very good new products, new buckwheat breed, which have much better production. And this was very limited, but all the species of breeds of buckwheat are going extinct because of the habitat loss, and people do not plant those buckwheat. They are promoting the very few of them. So with limited resource, we are going to, in the future, we are going to have very limited choice. And that well, and as the industrialized breeds or species, all those food, well, the limited genetic resources will end. Whenever they have very fatal issues like virus, they are not going to survive to feed the people, the human. And so that's a whole. We are losing biodiversity, including agricultural biodiversity, very fast. We are facing the massive extinction of biodiversity. And that eventually will end. We do not have enough species to feed human. That will be the case if we do not care about agricultural biodiversity in the future. Now.
So Jianyi, this is not just about environment and climate, those lofty goals. It is also about the sustainability of our food supply. Jianyi?
Yeah, because biodiversity food can do a lot of things to our agriculture system. It can help us to find a balance between profit and the health of the population. And also with biodiversity food, we will be able to greatly boost the livelihood of small-scale farmers and local producers who normally live in rural areas with limited income. Because when we think about this, the bigger corporations, they tend to focus on the monoculture and monocropping because they're more profitable. And it's the more regional biodiversity food that the small farmers grow that will bring more income to those farmers. And some traditional crops have good commercial potential as well because they do not have now because they're not well documented and they're not well researched. So once they are well documented and researched, they can be excellent cash crop for small scale.
Can you give me an example of that?
Quinoa, for example, used to be a subsistence crop in Peru, in South America. But because of increased visibility and attracted interest, it is now growing in over 70 countries and brings a lot of income to different farmers around the world. Mm. So in addition, I can give you another example. Traditional crops like pulses are also useful for intercropping and actually increase yields of other crops, helping to raise incomes for farmers and their families.
All right, we'll take a short break, and in the second part, we'll talk about the economic aspect of biodiversity. Don't go away, we'll be right back. So Stefan, as we earlier mentioned in the lead, there are over 30,000 kinds of edible plants in the world, but most of them have not made their way to our dinner tables. Is there a mechanism that can change that?
I think it needs a concerted effort across different sectors. I think a good example, maybe I can give you an example of from East Africa, where the so-called African leafy vegetables were seen as very backward, as being something that the poor people in the rural areas ate. But in essence, from a nutritional point of view, they're quite high in the contents of micronutrients compared to some of the other vegetables that are eaten in the urban areas. So by supporting farmers, particularly also women farmers, to generate income by producing these leafy vegetables, linking that to regional and urban markets, and at the same time having a real promotion around these African leafy vegetables through media, but also through official procurement through hospitals, we were able to, working with partners, to get it really up to a much more acknowledged crop also in the urban areas, so that today in the cities you can find these African leafy vegetables. So it is these types of a concerted effort where we have to identify where are these opportunities, how do we get it out, and get that diversity
but Stefan,
into the food
what about the
systems.
argument that it is actually the choice of the people's palates that decide what kind of food we eat? Those leafy vegetables didn't make to the dinner table because they don't taste as good, and they don't eat that. People don't eat them just because they don't taste good.
Yeah, I think consumers make their choices based on a series of factors. Cheap food is one important factor, and particularly if you're in an urban area. Another factor is, of course, what is available. What can you get access to? So the whole food environment is very important in terms of what do consumers have access to.
Oh.
And it is not just the decision of the consumer, but it is also what is available to the consumer to choose from. But in the end, the consumer will make the decision. And again, consumer behavior is also linked to knowledge and information and education. And therefore, working with schools very early on, working with chefs, these are elements that can contribute to raising the awareness.
Wow.
And also showing that these other crops can be very beneficial and can be tasty.
And Paul, you are a chef, I presume. What can chefs do to shape people's making choices about their food?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think food is something that's very personal. It's very easy to talk about in economic terms, but it's something very intimate. We all have food that we put inside ourselves. We taste it, we enjoy it. We do that with friends, with family. And there's so much more that comes to food than just giving us energy and nutrients. It's also about enjoyment. It's about culture. It's about tradition. There's so many things. And so I think chefs can play a really key role in helping to introduce new ingredients, to bring them out, to explain how you use them, how you can get the most out of them, and how you can enjoy them. And we've seen lots of great examples of this. Looking at West Africa, I have a friend who's working on fulmio, which is a form of, it's part of the millet family. It's grown with very limited water, and so it's quite good. It's grown, and he's using that, and he says it's also a very easy food to deal with. He says it's for lazy people, because you don't have to do a lot of work to prepare it.
Does it taste good?
But it can get a very good flavor profile, and it's healthy for you. So it uses less water, tastes good as well. So there's lots of examples of this where foods have been discovered for their flavor. Even things like rocket, in Italy, was discovered by a chef who found that growing by the side of the road, and now you can buy it in almost every supermarket of the world. And it's got a very peppery flavor, and people have learned how to use that to complement dishes, to add that flavor. It also has a lot of nutrients. It's green leafy. There's lots of examples like that. Jinyi talked about quinoa, the leafy greens in East Africa. There's lots of these examples, and a lot of them are being discovered from indigenous crops, rediscovering these kinds of foods which are out there, and rediscovering foods that have that benefit, and finding ways to bring them to the table and to create value for them, and pair them well with other ingredients.
So is an interaction between customers, chefs, and farmers to generate this kind of a momentum?
Yes, that's what we're seeing. Is there really needs to be a connection. Chefs are very good at interpreting and taking the produce and then transforming it into something that is desirable on a plate. Sometimes people look at a vegetable, or they look at some food, and they're not quite sure what it is. It's a really interesting game to play with people, where you pull out different foods and ask them to identify them, and then to get them to taste them and become familiar with food. And so that connection, because we've seen a lot of urbanization, people have moved away from the farm, away from where food is grown, and there's this disconnect. But what we need to do is try and reconnect where food comes from, and how it can be vital for the future of both the planet and our own health.
And Mr. Zhou, of course, we have to bring industry in. Pursuing revenue, interest is, of course, the nature of commerce. So agriculture becomes industrialized and globalized. That means the rise of monocropping and the specific varieties of food on the table. So industries, when they want to seek profit, what can consumers and the society in general do to change the mechanisms inside the food industry to have more diversities and more choices?
Yes, and we believe all stakeholders must participate. We think all stakeholders' participation, especially the customer, the consumer, well, through their buying, through their advocating, and influence the policymaker, influence that eventually will come back to the industrial business, and they will change, and they must change.
And Jianyi, if that is the goal, if biodiversity and more varieties of food is a good thing, what are the major challenges making that happen? Jianyi?
Well, today, half of the commercial seed market is controlled by 3 companies. 4 firms control up to 90% of the global grain trade, and 7 companies control 100% of the fertilizer sales. So big-scale advantages are arguably good for increasing production, but they can also be problematic with respect to the challenge of ensuring access to nutritional foods for all. So, like in other areas of sustainable development, it's a universal challenge that require fundamental changes in the ways all societies produce and consume. Our current food system, which is characterized with high input, resource-intensive, monocropping farming systems, as you mentioned before, has caused massive deforestation, water scarcities, soil depletion, and high levels of greenhouse gas emissions. This cannot deliver sustainable food and agriculture production. So to take these challenges, we need a transformative process towards holistic, sustainable approaches. And what you said earlier about people's choice was a very interesting question, actually. We think that actually, what people like to eat for the larger part was shaped by what is available in the market, as Stephen mentioned before. Because those food that are very much available in the market, they've been processed, they've been cooked for many different times, and so they come up with many different availability of choices. But the more biodiversity food, they are not. So this is one thing that we think we should work on, because we need a broad government policy support and other social interventions to correct this kind of market failure. So I can give you an example of what we do here in China. At the Good Food Fund, we publish the Good Food Pledge, which includes 8 principles, including supporting biodiversity species, buying local foods, and improve food education to raise public awareness, and very importantly, to enhance documentation and research and use of regional biodiversity species, which is exactly why people need to know these species exist. And also, we launched the Edible China initiative, which includes building the nation's first, what we call the central bank of the plant kingdom. We give accreditations to local governments to support productions of biodiversity plants, and to chefs. As you said before, chefs can play a very important role. And we give accreditations to chefs and restaurants who use these products. So we think it's very important to document and to use these products to make them available to the public.
And Stefan, I know that some international organization is also catching on, because there's going to be a summit on biodiversity. It takes place at the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. The theme is urgent action on biodiversity for sustainable development. So is varieties of food also related to biodiversity, and what can the international community do? Stefan?
Yeah. We at the Alliance for Biodiversity International and CIAT, one of our focus is really to transform the food systems at this nexus, at the intersection between the agriculture, nutrition, and environment. And that is where biodiversity for food and nutrition plays a central role. And so, yes, I mean, as we move forward, we have different reports that have been coming out over the last 18 months, 2 years, that really put biodiversity at the center of food systems, and the importance of using biodiversity in agriculture as well as in terms of nutrition. So, we can have cheap food, but it comes at a cost. And the cost is in terms of the public health, it's the cost of the climate, it's at the cost of the environment, which we have to weigh against the possibilities of using that greater diversity to be able to exploit that diversity, as different speakers have been mentioning. And critical here is that we work together on it. It has to be, the industry has to be challenged in terms of increasing that availability, affordability, and desirability of different foods. And there are different efforts that are being made at the level of the industry as well that we need to work with and support. At the same time, I think we need more information around this diversity and how better to use it, and link that also to policy support that allows the consumers to be educated around this, but also allows the support in terms of utilizing this diversity better. So global fora on use of biodiversity are very critical to raise the awareness. And if we compare the discussions and the dialogue over the last 2 to 3 years compared to 10 years ago, the dialogue has changed dramatically towards emphasizing the importance of biodiversity in food and nutrition.
All right. Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you, Paul, Jianyi, and also thank you, Professor. And you've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Zhu in Beijing. Goodbye.